On Thanksgiving night, in front of 30 relatives, my parents handed my sister a $13,000 luxury cruise package. Then they turned to me with a mocking smile and handed me a crumpled $2 lottery ticket. My mother told me it was all that was appropriate for my situation. They all laughed, thinking I was the family failure. They didn't know that little ticket was about to be worth $100 million, or that I was about to use it to expose every lie they were hiding. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you are new here, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the like button and share this story with someone you love. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching this from and what time it is right now. I love knowing that people from all over the globe are here with me. Now let us get into this story because it is one you are never going to forget. My name is Sarah Miller. For as long as I can remember, I was the invisible daughter. I was the one who stayed quiet at the dinner table while everyone talked about my sister Brittany. I was the one whose achievements were never quite good enough. I was the one who got a polite nod when I walked in and then got forgotten about for the rest of the evening. I am a landscape architect. I spend my days designing outdoor spaces that make people feel at peace. Parks where children play. Gardens where old couples walk hand in hand in the evening. Green rooftops above busy city buildings. I genuinely love what I do. But in my family, that work was always described as just playing with plants. My father Frank would say it with this little smirk, like my entire career was a joke he found mildly entertaining. My sister Brittany was the golden child. Everything she did was celebrated. Every promotion she got was announced at family dinners like a royal decree. My mother Susan would clap her hands and say, "That is our girl," as if the rest of us were not even in the room. Brittany married a man named Jason who called himself a real estate consultant. He wore expensive watches and talked loudly about deals he was closing. The family adored him. My father treated him like the son he never had. And me? I was just Sarah. The one with the dirty boots and the soil samples and the sketching notebooks full of tree diagrams. I had built a real career. I had real clients. I had a small but growing reputation in my field. None of that mattered at the family dinner table. What mattered was that I was not Brittany. That Thanksgiving started like all the others. My mother had cooked too much food and the house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon. Relatives I only saw twice a year were crowded into the living room making small talk. My uncle was arguing about football. My cousins were on their phones. Brittany and Jason arrived 20 minutes late, looking like they had just stepped off a magazine cover. Everyone turned to look at them when they walked in. Nobody turned to look at me. Dinner was loud and warm in the way family dinners can be when you are not paying close attention to what is actually happening underneath. I sat at my usual spot near the end of the table. I smiled when it was appropriate. I passed dishes when they were handed to me. I answered questions with short answers because nobody was really asking to know more. Then after dessert, my father stood up. Frank Miller was a tall man with a big voice, and he knew exactly how to use a room. He tapped his glass and everyone went quiet. He said he had a special announcement to make. He said that this year, more than any other year, he and my mother wanted to show their children how much they were loved and appreciated. He looked at Brittany first. He always did. He said that for Brittany and Jason, he had arranged a first-class luxury cruise package. 2 weeks in the Caribbean. A private cabin. Shore excursions included. The whole table erupted. People gasped and congratulated and clinked glasses. Brittany pressed her hand to her heart and said she was speechless. Jason put his arm around her and smiled, the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. Then my father turned to me. He was still smiling, but it was different now. It was the kind of smile that carries something sharp inside it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Crumpled. Worn at the edges. He held it out to me like it was a perfectly reasonable thing to hand a person in front of 30 watching eyes. It was a $2 lottery ticket. My mother said it from across the table before I could even process what I was holding. She said it was all that was appropriate for my situation. The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. A ripple of laughter that told me everything I needed to know about how I was seen in that house. I did not cry. I did not shout. I sat there and I held that crumpled ticket in my hand and I smiled because sometimes that is all you can do when the people who are supposed to love you choose public humiliation instead. What none of them knew was that the night was not over. And that small piece of paper they had handed me as a joke was about to become the most powerful thing in that entire room. I drove home that night in silence. No music. No phone calls. Just the sound of the road and the image of my father's smirking face playing on a loop in my mind. I had been through uncomfortable family moments before. I had sat through years of comparisons and dismissals and backhanded comments dressed up as concern. But that night felt different. That night they had not just overlooked me. They had made a show of it. They had used me as a punchline in front of everyone I had grown up around and they had enjoyed every second of it. I got home and put the lottery ticket on my kitchen counter. I did not even look at it properly. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window and stared out at the dark street for a long time. My apartment was small, but I had made it beautiful. Plants on every windowsill. A little herb garden on the balcony. Framed sketches of my best design projects on the walls. It was mine. Fully mine. And nobody in that family had ever once asked to see it. The next morning I got a phone call from my Grandma Rose. She was my father's mother, and the only person in that entire family who had ever made me feel like I truly mattered. She was in a rehabilitation center at the time recovering from a hip replacement. Her voice on the phone was soft but steady. She asked me how the dinner went and I told her I was fine. She said she knew I was not fine and that she had not been born yesterday. She told me to write down a name. She said it slowly and clearly the way she always did when something was important. The name was Michael Vance. She said he was a lawyer and that I should call him soon. She said there were things I needed to know and that she was sorry she had not told me sooner. Before I could ask her what she meant, she said she was tired and needed to rest. She told me she loved me and then she was gone. I wrote the name down and I sat with it for 2 days before I did anything. I was not sure what I was afraid of. Maybe I was afraid of what I might find. Maybe I was afraid that pulling on one thread would unravel something I could not put back together. On the 3rd day, I went to my father's house. Both my parents were out and I still had a key from years ago when I used to house sit for them during summer trips. I told myself I was just going to pick up a jacket I had left behind at Thanksgiving. That was the story I gave myself. But the truth is I walked straight past the coat rack and down the hall to my father's study. I had never been a person who snooped. I had always believed that people deserved their privacy and that trust was something you protected. But something my Grandma Rose had said was sitting inside me like a splinter, and I could not leave without at least looking. The study was neat the way men like my father keep their spaces. Everything in its place. Bookshelves. Organized by size. A clean desk with a leather blotter. But in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, I found something that was not neat at all. A folder stuffed with papers that had clearly been shoved in there quickly. The kind of filing you do when you are hiding something from yourself as much as from everyone else. I sat on the floor and I read every page. There were overdue bills. Not small ones. Months of missed payments on accounts I had never heard of. There were collection notices from creditors with aggressive language and final warning stamps in red ink across the top. There was a letter from a bank about a loan. The number on that letter made my breath catch. $180,000. Borrowed against collateral. I kept reading. The collateral was my Grandma Rose's house. I read it again to make sure I had understood correctly. Her house. The house she had lived in for 40 years. The house where I had spent summers as a child learning to press flowers and bake bread, and sit quietly with someone who actually listened to me. That house had been signed over as collateral on my father's loan. And the date on the paperwork was from a period when Grandma Rose was in the hospital sedated and recovering from surgery. My hands were shaking by the time I put the folder back. The cruise. The celebration. The grand gesture in front of 30 relatives. All of it had been performance. My father was drowning in debt, and instead of dealing with it, he had staged a family dinner to look like a man in control. He had given Brittany a gift he could not afford and handed me a lottery ticket and called it appropriate, and the whole room had laughed along without knowing they were watching a man desperately pretending everything was fine. I left the house. I sat in my car and breathed. Then I took out my phone and I called Michael Vance. His assistant answered, and when I said my name and that Grandma Rose had sent me, the call was transferred immediately. Michael Vance had a calm voice. The kind of calm that comes from decades of dealing with complicated situations without panicking. He said he had been expecting my call. He said there was quite a bit we needed to discuss and asked if I could come into his office the following week. I said yes. I wrote down the address. And as I drove away from my father's house, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something quieter and more certain than anger. The feeling that I was finally starting to understand the actual shape of the life I had been living inside. A week passed between that phone call and my meeting with Michael Vance. It was one of the longest weeks of my life. I went to work every day. I met with clients. I reviewed soil reports and revised planting plans and attended a site walkthrough for a new community garden project I had been hired to design. On the outside, I was completely normal. On the inside, I was carrying this enormous weight of knowing something I had not yet fully understood. I did not call my parents. I did not call Brittany. I did not tell a single person what I had found in that filing cabinet. I just waited. On the night before my meeting with the lawyer, I remembered the lottery ticket. It had been sitting on my kitchen counter since Thanksgiving, buried under a stack of mail, and a takeout menu I kept meaning to throw away. I almost walked past it again. Then something made me stop. I picked it up and smoothed it out on the counter. I opened the lottery app on my phone and typed in the numbers one by one. My heart was beating a little faster than normal, which I thought was strange because I was not genuinely expecting anything. It was a $2 ticket. It was a joke gift. It was something my father had handed me with a smirk in front of 30 people who laughed. The first number matched. I told myself that meant nothing. The second number matched. I took a slow breath. The third number matched. Then the fourth. Then the fifth. And then the sixth. I stood in my kitchen completely still for what felt like a very long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. The numbers on my phone screen did not change no matter how many times I looked at them. All 6 matched. Every single one. I had won $100 million. I did not scream. I did not jump around the room. I sat down on the kitchen floor slowly and carefully, like my legs had made a decision my brain had not quite approved yet. I sat there on the cold tile with my back against the cabinet, and I held that crumpled ticket in both hands, and I thought about my father's face when he handed it to me. The smirk. The performance of it. The way my mother had leaned across the table and said it was all that was appropriate for my situation. They had handed me $100 million as a punchline. After a while, I got up. I made another cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table and I thought very carefully about what to do next. The first decision was easy. I was not going to tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I understood the full picture. Not until I had sat in that lawyer's office and heard everything Michael Vance had to say. The next morning, I walked into his office and everything changed again. Michael Vance was older than I had imagined. Silver-haired and precise in the way he moved and spoke. His office was lined with books and felt like a place where serious things were handled with care. He shook my hand and poured me a glass of water, and then he told me that my Grandma Rose had been planning for this conversation for years. He explained that a long time ago Grandma Rose had watched the way my mother Susan treated me. She had seen the favoritism. She had noticed the way I was spoken to versus the way Brittany was spoken to. She had paid attention in the way that quiet and loving people do when they are worried about someone they love. And she had decided to do something about it privately and carefully so that nobody could interfere. Years before that Thanksgiving dinner, Grandma Rose had set up a trust fund in my name. $500,000. Managed by Michael Vance and completely separate from anything my parents could access or influence. She had done it quietly and legally, and she had told nobody because she knew that my mother would find a way to get to it if she found out it existed. I sat across from that lawyer and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt chosen. Not as a second option. Not as an afterthought. But deliberately and lovingly chosen by the one person in my family who had always seen me clearly. Michael Vance then told me something else. He said that the paperwork my father had used to put Grandma Rose's house up as collateral was being reviewed. He had been alerted to it by Grandma Rose herself before her surgery when she had noticed some documents had been taken from her home. He believed the signature on those papers was not written by Grandma Rose willingly, or with full understanding of what she was signing. He used the word forged carefully and precisely. He said he could not make that determination officially yet, but that the investigation was already underway. I told him about the loan documents I had found in my father's filing cabinet. He asked me to describe them in detail and he took notes. He said that information was very helpful. He said I had good instincts. I left his office and walked to my car, and sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. I had walked in that morning as Sarah Miller, the invisible daughter, the one who plays with plants, the one who got handed a crumpled ticket as a joke. I was walking out as something else entirely. A woman with a trust fund. A woman with a lawyer. A woman sitting on $100 million who had not told a single soul. I started the car and I drove home and I began to plan. Planning is something I am good at. It is actually what I do for a living. Before I design any outdoor space, I study the land first. I walk it slowly. I look at where the sun hits in the morning and where the shadows fall in the afternoon. I look at what is already growing and what has been struggling and what has quietly died beneath the surface without anyone noticing. Only after I understand all of that do I start drawing. I approach this situation the same way. I did not rush. I did not react emotionally. I gave myself time to gather every piece of information before I made a single move. And while I was gathering that information, the rest of my family was completely unaware that anything had changed. To them, I was still Sarah, still invisible, still the daughter who had been handed a $2 ticket as an appropriate gift. The next piece of information came from my Aunt Jane. She was my mother's younger sister, and the one member of that generation in our family who had never quite fit the mold. She said what she thought. She noticed what others pretended not to see. She had always been kind to me in the small and consistent way that matters more than grand gestures. She called me one afternoon and asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. Her voice had a particular tone that told me she had something specific to say. We met at a small cafe near her apartment and she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me carefully before she spoke. She told me she had been thinking about Thanksgiving. She said she had seen my face when my father handed me that ticket and that it had stayed with her. She said she wanted me to know some things that she had been holding on to for a while because she had not known what to do with them, and she thought I deserved to hear them now. The first thing she told me was about Jason. He was not a real estate consultant in any traditional sense. What he actually did was operate as a private lender targeting people who could not get traditional bank loans, people in desperate situations, people who did not fully understand the terms they were agreeing to. He charged interest rates that were far beyond what was legal, and he used aggressive tactics when payments were missed. Several people had already filed complaints. There was a quiet investigation happening that had not yet become public. I thought about my father's loan paperwork. $180,000. I thought about who might have arranged that loan and at what kind of interest rate and whether Frank Miller even fully understood what he had agreed to. Then my aunt told me the second thing. Jason was cheating on Brittany. Had been for over a year. His assistant. Someone Brittany had met at company events and had always been perfectly pleasant to because Brittany was a person who was always perfectly pleasant to everyone. My aunt had found out through a friend of a friend. The kind of information that travels quietly through the edges of social circles before it reaches the people it most concerns. But it was worse than just the betrayal itself. My aunt had heard that Jason's plan was deliberate. He was waiting for a specific property deal to close. Once that deal went through and the money landed, he intended to file for divorce quickly before Brittany had any legal claim to those particular assets. He had been timing it, calculating it, smiling at family dinners and putting his arm around my sister while counting down to the moment he would walk away with everything he had been accumulating. Brittany did not know any of this. I sat across from my aunt and I drank my coffee and I let all of it settle inside me. By the time we said goodbye and walked out into the gray afternoon air, I had a very clear picture of the landscape I was standing in. I could see where the sun hit and where the shadows fell. I could see what had been growing in secret and what had been quietly dying beneath the surface. I went home and I called Michael Vance. I told him everything my aunt had shared. He said the information about Jason aligned with things he had already been looking into. He said the pieces were coming together, and that when I was ready to act, he would be ready to help me. I told him I was almost ready. I just needed to wait for one more thing. That one more thing was the cruise. My parents had booked Brittany and Jason on a 2-week Caribbean cruise using money they did not have in any honest sense of the word. They were set to depart in 3 weeks. 14 days at sea. Ports of call in multiple countries. Far from home. Far from lawyers and documents and investigators. Far from me. I decided that was exactly the right moment. While they were on that ship, I quietly began the process of claiming my lottery winnings through the proper legal channels. Michael Vance guided me through every step. It was done carefully and privately. I also instructed him to begin the legal process of challenging the collateral paperwork on Grandma Rose's house. The forged signature investigation moved forward. A forensic document specialist was brought in. I visited Grandma Rose at the rehabilitation center. I sat beside her bed and held her hand and told her that I knew everything now. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. She said she had always believed this day would come. She said she had never stopped believing in me, even when she was the only one who did. I kissed her hand and told her to rest. I told her she was going home soon. And then I went home myself and I waited for the phone to start ringing from somewhere out at sea. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk reviewing plans for a rooftop garden project when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I let it ring. Then it rang again. Then my father called. Then Brittany. Then Jason. All within the space of about 20 minutes. I put my phone face down on the desk and finished my notes on the rooftop project first. Then I made myself a cup of tea. Then I sat down and I called them back. My mother answered immediately. Her voice had that particular pitch it gets when she is trying to sound calm but is absolutely not calm. She said they were having some issues with their cards at the current port. She said it was probably just a banking error. She said these things happen when you traveled internationally. She said it would be so helpful if I could just sort it out for them quickly. I told her I would see what I could do. I did not sort it out quickly. I waited 2 more days. I let them navigate that situation on their own for a little while. I let them feel the particular discomfort of being far from home with declining cards and no obvious solution. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed them all in one place at one time and I needed them to actually pick up when I called. On the 3rd day, I sent a message to the group and told them I had something important to share and that I needed everyone together when I called. They gathered in the ship's main lounge. I could picture it clearly. My father with his big voice suddenly quieter than usual. My mother sitting very straight the way she does when she is performing composure. Brittany and Jason side by side. Various relatives who had been on the trip hovering nearby because group calls always attract an audience. They thought I was going to tell them I was sending money. I could hear it in their voices when they answered. That particular warmth that appears in people who suddenly need something from you. My mother called me sweetheart. My father said it was so good to see my face. Jason said hey Sarah in that easy tone he used when he wanted to seem likable. I smiled and I told them I had some things to share. And I asked them to stay on the call until I was finished. Then I shared my screen. The first thing I showed them was the loan document. $180,000 borrowed against collateral they did not own outright. I let them read the numbers. I watched my father's face change. The second thing I showed them was the forensic document report. The specialist had concluded that the signature on the collateral paperwork did not match the verified signature samples from Grandma Rose. The word forgery appeared in the document in clear black text. I watched my father's face go from pale to gray. The third thing I showed them was for Brittany specifically. It was a series of messages between Jason and his assistant. I had obtained them through legal channels with Michael Vance's guidance. The messages made the nature of their relationship completely clear. They also included a conversation in which Jason discussed the timeline of the property deal and specifically mentioned waiting until it closed before filing the divorce papers. His exact words about my sister in those messages were not kind. They were the words of someone who had been performing a marriage for financial reasons and had never intended it to last. The lounge on that ship went completely silent. Then it stopped being silent all at once. My mother started talking over my father, who was talking over Jason, who was saying something I could not make out because Brittany was no longer in the frame. A cousin in the background dropped something. Someone was crying. The carefully constructed image that family had been presenting to the world for years collapsed in real time on a screen in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. And I watched it happen from my quiet apartment surrounded by my plants and my framed sketches and my perfectly chosen life. I waited for the noise to die down a little. Then I spoke clearly and calmly. I told them that I had won $100 million from the lottery ticket they had handed me as a joke. I told them that I had used a portion of that money to legally purchase Grandma Rose's house outright, and that the collateral arrangement had been dissolved. I told them that Grandma Rose's home was now protected under a legal structure that no member of our family could touch or threaten again. I told them that Jason's lending practices had been reported to the appropriate authorities, and that my father's involvement with those loans was part of the documentation. Then I said one last thing. I told them I had not done any of this to destroy anyone. I told them I had not sat in my apartment plotting revenge like a villain in a movie. I told them that I had simply turned on the lights in a house full of people who had been very comfortable in the dark. What they did with the light from that point forward was entirely up to them. Then I ended the call. The months that followed were not quiet. Jason's business practices became public, and his partners reported him to financial regulators. My father filed for bankruptcy. My mother called me 17 times in 1 week. I answered twice. Brittany reached out differently, carefully, with none of the performance and all of the genuine hurt of someone who had just learned that the life she thought she was living was not real. We started meeting for coffee, slowly, without pressure, building something honest from the ground up the way you do when the old foundation has completely given way. Grandma Rose moved back into her home on a bright Saturday morning in early spring. I had arranged for full-time care and a complete renovation of her garden. She walked through the front door and ran her hand along the wall, and smiled the way people smile when they are somewhere they truly belong. She looked at me and said she always knew. I believed her. People ask me now if the money changed everything. The honest answer is that the money changed my options. It opened doors that had always existed but that I could not reach before. But the moment that actually changed my life was not when I checked those lottery numbers. It was not when I walked into Michael Vance's office. It was not even when I shared my screen on that video call. It was the moment I decided that the way my family saw me was not the truth about me. That moment cost nothing. That moment was available to me long before any lottery ticket or trust fund or legal victory. I had just been waiting for permission that was never going to come from the people I had been waiting on. I am Sarah Miller. I am a landscape architect who builds beautiful spaces for people to live and breathe and grow in. I chose myself, and it turned out that was the most powerful thing I ever did. If this story moved you in any way, please give it a like right now. It takes 1 second and it means the world to this channel. Subscribe if you are not already part of this community, because there are so many more stories coming that you do not want to miss. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And drop a comment below telling me which part of Sarah's story hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next story.